Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. In this first hour, we're going to get back into some of the issues in the news. And then if you would like to listen or even watch, we have two in-studio guests. O.S. Hawkins will be with us as we talk about his latest book, the Nehemiah Code, and that joins so many of the other books that he's written over the years, the Joshua Code, the James Code, the Jesus Code, and others, the Daniel Code. So we'll get into that with him in the second hour. And then in the third hour, even though you may not be able to hear it on the local radio station, you can certainly listen to it on the national broadcast that we have in about 260 stations, and that will be an interview in studio with Coach Tony Dungy and his wife, Lauren. They have written these Team Dungy books, and these most recent ones are kind of fun. Austin Plays Fair and Maria Finds Courage, but we'll also talk about some of the other books that they have written together. Uncommon Marriage, and of course his books on Uncommon Everything are certainly a variety of books that we will cover as well. So we have a lot to cover in the next couple of hours, so hope you'll join us. And if you don't have a chance to listen for the entire time, because I know you have a life too, you can obviously at any point along the way download the podcast and listen to it later, or watch it on the YouTube channel. Of course, I might just mention we are, of course, also broadcasting, as we do, on the Facebook channel, which is part of Point of View. So you can go there and watch it on that, or you can even leave a note, and we'll certainly react to that a little bit later. Got some things to cover in this first hour. First of all, the issue of Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. I thought I'd read just a piece by Mike Huckabee, and then we're going to move on. I mean, I know that you will hear for days, maybe even ad nauseum, all sorts of analysis and point, counterpoint, and even some people making a bigger deal out of this than I think that it is, and saying that this is maybe the end of the Trump candidacy and presidency. We've heard this before, right? Every time Donald Trump said something, well, that's the end of his candidacy. Then even after he was elected, well, this is the end of the Trump presidency, and I don't think that's going to happen either. But that is certainly something we will spend just a minute talking about, because I think Mike Huckabee's done a good job of trying, at least as best as possible, pulling some of this together in a way that makes some sense. Then I'm going to move on to a couple of other things. First of all, I'm going to really challenge you to be praying for university students, because this is something that has been put together by our good friends at Arise and Pray. So I'll talk about that in just a few minutes, and that will be something that would be an action item for you. Then I have a piece by David French, who is talking about something that has started to concern me. And the other day, I even asked one of the NRA board members about it, and he said, well, I just know that New York is trying to do something to drive gun sales out of the state. But I think it's bigger even than that. So I thought we would get into that topic along the way, and a couple of other stories, as well as even my daily commentary. So there's just a lot to cover. But let's get to the issue of the day that everybody has been talking about. Certainly we're talking about yesterday, and even starting Tuesday evening, as, of course, we had a number of things happen simultaneously. First of all, the decision on the part of the jury to actually, on 8 of the 18 counts, find Paul Manafort guilty. And then, since the number 8 seems to be very important, we also had Michael Cohen, the lawyer for the president, actually plead guilty to 8 felonies. So those are the issues on the table. And the question is how far does this go to affect the president? Because, as you may remember, originally the attempt on the part of Robert Mueller and his team of investigators was to try to find any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The closest you can come to anything like that is Paul Manafort has had dealings in Ukraine and other places, and of course he was on the campaign for 6 months, but it I think is illustrated by the fact that that didn't lead anywhere, to the fact that really, in a sense, Robert Mueller and his team handed that off to another jury. But let's, if we can, get to the piece by Mike Huckabee, because he said on Tuesday afternoon, on the heels of a jury verdict, well, partial verdict, in the Paul Manafort trial, that could send Manafort to prison for the rest of his life, even though it had nothing to do with Donald Trump or Russian collusion. It was revealed that Michael Cohen had accepted a plea deal in a case that has been moved by the special counsel to the Southern District of New York. That prompted President Trump's personal lawyer, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, to issue this statement. There is no allegation of any wrongdoing against the president in the government's charge against Mr. Cohen. It is clear that, as the prosecutor noted, Mr. Cohen's actions reflect a pattern of lies and dishonesty over a significant period of time. So, Mike Huckabee goes on to say that back in March, Michael Cohen told Vanity Fair that Trump didn't know that he had paid Stephanie Clifford, whose real name as a porn star was Stormy Daniels, $130,000 out of his own pocket. He had said the same thing to the New York Times a month earlier. Significantly, Cohen's plea deal departs from what he had previously claimed and what Giuliani has said about no campaign laws being broken, because it specifies that he broke the law to influence the 2016 election at the direction of a candidate. Of course, that would be Donald Trump. But Cohen's statements, as legal expert Andrew McCarthy noted on Sean Hannity's Tuesday show, have been all over the map. I think that's probably a fair statement as well. He theorized that the Cohen case had ended up in the Southern District of New York because Mueller didn't think it would advance his Russian investigation. Cohen hasn't entered into a cooperative agreement, he explained, but rather a straight-up guilty plea. If Cohen were regarded as a valuable witness or cooperator, he said he'd be seeing a very different kind of plea agreement. He says, I'm assuming one that doesn't call for any jail time. McCarthy said, I don't think anybody objective could look at the way in which the Clinton email investigation was handled and the way the Trump campaign has been pursued and say that there's a single standard of justice. I don't see how that could be. And at the same time, he says he doesn't want Mueller taking the reins on when the U.S. attorney in Utah is already looking into it. I'd rather see them do that than see Mueller do it. I think Mueller should stay focused on what he's doing and bring it to an end. And those are all comments from Andrew McCarthy, who, by the way, has been on this program with us before. So if it can't be said enough, Mike Huckabee says, as far as we've come in this investigation, with people being sent to prison or perhaps to rot there, nothing ties Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, with any attempt by Russia to interfere in the 2016 election. On the other hand, plenty of evidence ties Hillary Clinton with Russians who contributed to the fictional dossier, which we've talked about on this program, compiled by British ex-spy Christopher Steele for the purpose of interfering with the 2016 election. And Mike Huckabee says, as I said yesterday, if you're looking for evidence for a two-tier justice system, Hillary is, he says, Exhibit A. But I agree with McCarthy that Mueller shouldn't take over the Hillary case. I don't trust him to take over that case, he says as well. So finally, so speaking of Hillary, Mark Levine on his Tuesday radio program pointed out that longtime Clinton General Counsel Lanny Davis, who just happens to be, by complete coincidence, to be representing Michael Cohen, has Cohen plead guilty to 2 campaign finance violations that don't actually exist. Besides that, such a plea deal and bargain is a deal made with a criminal who doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. In other words, not very believable, and applies only to his specific case. Since it hasn't been adjudicated, it can't be cited as a precedent to use against Trump. So, if nothing else, he says that Mark Levin has one take on it, Alan Dershowitz has the other. But I posted the article in case you have some questions about what does it all mean. I think it means a lot of people talking about it, but maybe no impact at all on the Trump presidency. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, the tech giants Facebook, Apple, and YouTube announced that they would ban the content of Alex Jones. At the same time, Twitter's Jack Dorsey explained that Alex Jones had not violated Twitter's rule, and the tech platform would act impartially regardless of political viewpoints. When I heard that he made that statement, I said on radio that he was about to face a huge backlash. I was right. Although he faced criticism from the outside, the most potent came from his fellow employees. A Twitter vice president sent out an email promising to take appropriate steps to help customers feel safe concerning potential hate speech, and Alex Jones was eventually banned. David French, in a recent commentary, reminds us that the internal mob in these tech companies is what makes a difference. There may be online outrage and a huge backlash from progressives, but the swift judgment is most effective when there are internal forces in the tech companies. He reminds us of the decision by Google to fire James Damore. Executives did so in part because employees reacted to his memo and demanded an inclusive environment. Kevin Williamson didn't last long at The Atlantic because of fears that he would negatively affect workplace relationships. All of this is important to remember when the tech giants promise to be more open-minded and to defend free speech. They have essentially formed a digital cartel that is rigorously ruled by a progressive corporate culture. Students who graduate from universities that ban conservative speakers and promote identity politics populate these tech companies. They punish their own if they stray from the progressive catechism, so it's highly unlikely that they will ever promote true free speech on their platform. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the things I want to encourage you to do is to maybe pray for kids going back to college. And, of course, we had our good friend Vicky Garza has been on this program with us before. And I might point you to a website called ariseandpray.org, Arise and Pray. And, again, this is a desire to really have 40 days of prayer for colleges and universities. Now, if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that is something we express our concerns about. What it's like, for example, for a student who might have Christian convictions to go to a secular campus and see his or her faith assaulted. A conservative kid who takes a political science class and is made fun of because he or she believes in some of the values we talk about here at Point of View. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do is go to ariseandpray.org. And I also would mention those of you that actually already subscribe to Nick Pitt's daily briefing. He has a feature on that as well today. So there's a number of different ways you can find your way. But real quickly, I just want to read a little bit of what is on that website. And one of those, they say, is we should, of course, hunger and thirst for righteousness because hunger and thirst are always satisfied. And it says, prayer strikes the match of revival. Arise and Pray is a prayer movement created by You Arise for college students and the people who love them. God is encountering this generation and rising up an army of students who are hungry to see Him revive their campus. It also goes on to say history is made by prayer warriors, and I love this because it says history has proven that prayer always precedes revival. Many of America's greatest revivals began on college campuses. For example, what is known as the Haystack Revival. That happened in 1806, gave way to the beginning of the great missions outreach. Matter of fact, it really preceded just a few years, but was, if you will, the seminal event that brought about what was called the Second American Revival. So again, the Second American Awakening was certainly one of those issues. Before Charles Finney came to Rochester in 1831, you do have exactly the Second Great Awakening and prayed for the Great Revival. Then you have Levi Ward, a 24-year-old student of the newly formed Monroe County Bible Society, who was placing a Bible in every home in 1825. God is awakening a new generation to see his love poured out on campus. So again, You Arise began the Arise and Pray 40 Days of Prayer back a number of years ago. I think it's been 5 years now since they've done that. Our prayer focuses on 40 topics that impact the lives of students and universities, students including depression, loneliness, perfection, and stress. This one here deals with the whole issue of sexual immorality. So again, I would encourage you to make it a matter of prayer, to pray for those who are going off to college. And of course, if you want to also pray for your kids as they go to elementary school, middle school, high school, that would be appropriate as well. But I thought I'd mention that today. And again, just to give credit to our good friend Nick Pitts, because one of the things that he also has done is taken the time to emphasize that today on his daily briefing. So you can find the link there as well. Let me also, since we've talked about this idea of abolishing ICE, come to that particular issue as well. And that is, just a few days ago, we had a desire to really begin to address the issue of ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So that's why you had just 2 days ago President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence take the time to honor the brave men and women of Border Patrol and of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And I thought I would just mention a few of the president's remarks. We could have done that yesterday, but Nick went in a different direction. So I thought just before the week is out, mention this simply because there's such an emphasis right now to abolish ICE on the part of certain candidates. And it's maybe important for us just for a moment to remember what these individuals do. And so the president said some things. I'll just pick a few things here. Let me extend my gratitude to every law enforcement professional representing ICE and the Customs Border Patrol. You're incredible people. You do an unbelievable job. Then he goes on and gives some of the statistics that he's want to do. He said over the last year, ICE and CPB seized more than 2.8 million pounds of illicit and deadly narcotics. A lot of people would have died. In the interior of our country, ICE officers arrested over 127,000 criminal aliens. You know, when you hear people say, well, these ICE agents, they are arresting people. Or the other day I talked about the story of this individual who was driving his wife to get a cesarean and then was taken by ICE. And, of course, when people don't point out the fact that he was wanted for murder, you kind of miss one of the most important facts that didn't show up in the news story. But anyway, 127,000 criminal aliens. These are individuals that have either been convicted or accused of some criminal activity, either in this country or in their home country. Then he goes on to say, including those charged and convicted at 48,000 assaults, 12,000 sex crimes, and 1,800 homicides. So again, those are just staggering numbers. And I do want to say to some of our friends that when you talk about abolishing ICE, what are you going to replace it with? Because this is doing a tremendous amount of service, and it would do a tremendous amount of harm if all of a sudden we didn't have these agents out there doing what they're supposed to do. And again, another statistic from the comments by President Donald Trump, every day on average, CPB, and that again would be Border Patrol, prevents 10 known or suspected terrorists from entering the United States. And he says, what a job you've done. And then after a couple of officers were able to speak, they told some stories about their work on the border or how they've had to fight MS-13. The president turned his attention to some other points, and, of course, you would know that he wasn't going to miss this opportunity. So the president said, sadly, in recent months, a coalition of open borders extremists have waged an unprecedented assault on American law enforcement, our greatest people threatening ICE and Border Patrol. He says leading, and he was implying liberal politicians, have even launched a campaign to abolish ICE, something I just talked about in just a minute. And in other words, they want to abolish America's borders. Any politician who puts criminal aliens before American citizens should find a new line of work. And he says these extremists who attack ICE and CPB want to portray themselves as champions of social justice. They are not. But their radical policies are the ultimate injustice, hurting innocent Americans and spilling innocent blood. People are dying because of either their lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, or, he does take a shot, even plain stupidity. And the true champions of justice, he said, are right here in the room, and they are proudly wearing the badge of American law enforcement. So at a time when you're hearing people in the streets saying abolish ICE, no borders, and all the rest, I thought I might cover something which I don't think was covered very well by the mainstream press, and that is just a time in which both the president, Donald Trump, and the vice president, Mike Pence, did try to honor those individuals there and talk about the important work that Border Patrol and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, actually do. Just before we take a break, let me just mention that we will, as we always do, post a number of these articles. I have posted one on Manafort and Cohen. We're going to get into the corporate gun control issue in just a minute. Those are already posted. But my commentary today is called The Internal Mob. And that is, as you well remember, earlier this month, you had the tech giants, Facebook, Apple, YouTube, and they announced that they would ban the content of Alex Jones. We're not fans of Alex Jones around this table. You know that. But what I thought was interesting is at the same time, Twitter's Jack Dorsey explained that Alex Jones had not violated Twitter's rule and that the platform would act impartially regardless of political viewpoints. And when I heard that said, I said on the air that day that I was sure that there would be a huge backlash, and of course I was right. But it's interesting, and this is the point I'm making, and it pulls from some other things that David French has identified. Yes, there was obviously a backlash from outside, but the most significant backlash took place inside, in which the people that were fellow employees of Twitter were saying, wait a minute, you can't do that. One of the vice presidents of Twitter even sends out an email to all of their staff saying they're going to take appropriate actions to help customers feel safe concerning potential hate speech. And, of course, then they eventually did ban Alex Jones, really put him on a timeout, but same sort of thing. And the point is that oftentimes what happens is if there's a backlash, it only works if there's people inside the particular tech giant and these individuals that are part of what is called, I call the digital cartel, that raise it as well. And you can see what happens because oftentimes when the people internally are upset, then action takes place. You might remember that when Google decided to fire James Damore, it was because there were all sorts of people said, I don't feel safe having a person like that working for Google. And Kevin Williamson, who I will quote later this week, also when he went to work at Atlantic, he got fired pretty quickly simply because, again, some said, this might negatively affect the workplace. So as important as it is to have people on the outside kind of making noise, it's the people on the inside that sometimes determine what really happens with those tech giants. So it's something to think about. And if you would like to read my commentary, it is all about that internal mob and how significant it is. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Don't forget that we'll have O.S. Hawkins in studio with us in about a half an hour. And then after we finish with him in about an hour and a half, we'll have Coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren in studio. We'll be talking about the Team Dungy books, some children's books, but also I think we'll delve into some of the books they've published in the past, like Uncommon and Uncommon Marriage and a variety of others. If you would like to follow along with what I'm going to be talking about now, Now, the second article we've posted here is a piece that says corporate gun control. It's really kind of good news, bad news. We're going to start with the good news, but then we'll get into the bad news and talk about, in some respects, how, first of all, various banking interests, that would be Citicorp or Citigroup and Bank of America, and then how many of these online platforms, the digital giants, YouTube, Facebook, we'll also mention Amazon, Reddit, and some others, actually doing what they can to prevent free speech on the Second Amendment. And it connects up to my commentary, which I just mentioned a minute ago. A little bit later in the article, David French talks about how it's the internal mob that matters. So in some respects, this article we've posted links, in a sense, to the piece that I've posted today as my Viewpoints commentary. So it all comes around full circle. But let's get into it. David French says that, let's be honest, if you own guns or you're a gun rights supporter, and if you're concerned about government restrictions on the Second Amendment, the future looks bright, he says. The elevation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court may well represent the death knell for draconian forms of gun control, including like bans on so-called assault weapons, bans on standard capacity magazines, and things of that nature for semi-automatic pistols and rifles. Moreover, meaningful federal gun control has been blocked for a generation, and red state legislatures are moving almost uniformly to liberalize state gun laws. Witness, for example, the steady spread of what's called constitutional carry in many of the red states across the land. So that's the good news. Now the bad news. He said, but another threat looms, one that can stretch across the entire American landscape. It is immune to filibuster and is largely sheltered from judicial review. It's a threat that can choke off financing for the gun industry, stifle speech about gun, and lock the gun rights community into offline and small online ghettos that restrict their ability to communicate. So what's happening, David French asks? Well, the titans of American banking and communication are taking steps to restrict the use of their funds or platforms by gun makers, gun rights advocates, and others. The threat is now just emerging, but it may be as great a danger to gun rights as it is to the culture of free speech in this nation. And he says, indeed, the two are linked. So if you're taking some notes, you might number 1 to 2 and then 1 to 4. 1 to 2, we'll look at just two banking groups that are doing this. First of all, Citigroup. In a short, non-exclusive survey, he talks about the fact that Citigroup struck one of the first blows, taking action in March. And that is, this comes from a news story. Citigroup is setting restrictions on the sale of firearms by its business customers, making it the first Wall Street bank to take a stance in the divisive nationwide gun control debate. Again, I'm reading from the news article. The new policy announced Thursday prohibits the sale of firearms to customers who have not passed a background check and are younger than 21. It also bars the sale of bump stocks and high-capacity magazines. It would apply to clients who offer credit cards backed by Citigroup or borrow money using banking services or raise capital through the company. The news story sounds really, kind of tame, because after all, we're not for bump stocks and things like that. But already we've talked, if you've listened to previous programs, about individuals that all of a sudden said, I can't use that bank anymore because they said, you sell guns, so we're not going to let you borrow money from us, or I'm not going to take those credit cards if they go through your particular gun shop, or whatever it might be. So anyway, that's Citigroup. Let's take the other one. David French says, not to be outdone, Bank of America has acted against assault weapons. Here's the beginning of a New York Times article, and it says, again, this is quoting now the New York Times, Bank of America will stop lending money to gun manufacturers that make military-inspired firearms for civilian use, such as the AR-15 style rifles that have been used in multiple mass shootings, a company executive said Tuesday. So again, while the bank's actions apply to the manufacture and sale of firearms, there is considerably unfolding online threats, he points out, to speech about guns. So 1 and 2, Citigroup, Bank of America. Now 1 through 4, let's look at some of the titans of tech. The first would be Facebook has announced restricted any links to a website called codeisfreespeech.com, which contains, of course, we've talked about this before, downloadable plans for a number of legal firearms, including 3D printable firearms at the heart of the whole debate about what we talked about with Cody Wilson. The site includes plans for weapons such as, 1911, a weapon so common and so basic that it dates back to, well, 1911, actually before. And you can buy plans for a T-shirt with that on there, but Facebook's kind of banning all of that. That's number one. Number two, YouTube has its own restrictions on speech about firearms and prohibits any content that intends to sell firearms or provides instructions on manufacturing a firearm. I'll be honest, sometimes I do watch YouTube if I'm thinking about a gun or I want to understand how to maybe repair it or clean it or something like that. But that restriction is starting to affect the kinds of things you can see on YouTube. And as he says, the latter prohibition is broad enough to, if YouTube wishes, include information on assembling a firearm from its component parts, a necessary part of firearm cleaning and maintenance. That's number two. Number three, Reddit has banned certain gun forums and updated its policy to forbid using Reddit to solicit or facilitate, extremely broad terms, transactions or gifts involving firearms. Its policy applies to gun sales, drug sales, prostitution, stolen goods, personal information, counterfeit official documents. You remember that one of these is not like the other. Let's try this again. Drug sales, prostitution, stolen goods, personal information, counterfeit official documents. Okay. But in there, gun sales. See, gun sales is equated with prostitution, stolen goods, and the rest. See where we're going with this? I thought it was kind of interesting. One of the things is not like the other, as he points out. The keeping and bearing of firearms is an explicit enumerated constitutional right. The rest of the list deals with criminal activity. So there you go. And then finally, the list keeps going. He says one more. Number four, Amazon Web Services has reportedly removed Code is Free Speech Com from its web service, and Shopify also just updated its free speech policies to deny space for the kind of products intended to harm. It also placed on a restricted list all semi-automatic weapons packaged with detachable magazines capable of accepting more than 10 rounds. Also reportedly deleted the accounts of a number of weapons retailers, including some that I'm familiar with, Spike's Tactical and Franklin Armory. So it said, again, it's let's keep in mind that the actions represent not the culmination of a gun control campaign, but the front edge of a wave of corporate activity and suppression. And he says, as I've written before, in an age of online outrage, you can find angry mobs on both sides of virtually any issue, but it almost always is the case that the internal mob matters. If you don't understand that, I just talked about it a minute ago, but it's my commentary today in which I point that out. It's those individuals that are in those particular mobs, if you will, inside the tech companies, inside the banking industry, that are the ones that are really pushing for all of this. And then when you have people on the outside that are gun control activists pushing for it, that's where it happens. Earlier today, he said, David French said, I spoke at length to Washington Free Beacon Stephen Gutowski, perhaps the Internet's best one-stop journalistic shop for not just for technical advice on firearms, but also for national trends in gun control. He's been diligently covering the recent trend of increasing corporate restrictions. He noted that the corporate actions have been more aggressive than what we've seen with Alex Jones, something I just mentioned again in my commentary just a minute ago, with a fraction of the attention. Simply put, that has to change. Few American communities, including the pro-life community, are better organized or more mobilized than the gun rights community, and it's time to shine at least a bright spotlight on corporate gun control as the one that illuminates government gun restrictions, the more traditional focus of the NRA. But not even the mighty NRA can force corporations to change course in the absence of government intervention. Corporations are entities that possess their own constitutional rights, yet the NRA can seek to inform and persuade. Gun rights advocates and proponents can invest in alternative platforms, and young conservatives can and should seek career paths in tech and other key industries to break up the monoculture. In other words, while we're doing our best to make arguments in the here and now, it's imperative, he says, for gun rights proponents to play the corporate long game, just as they did in the remarkably successful 30-year campaign to liberalize gun laws. The ability to preserve a functioning gun industry and a free flow of information about firearms may well depend on it. Corporations have entered the fight, and gun rights supporters are mainly on the outside looking in. So I just wanted to alert you to that and show you again the connection between even this column and my viewpoints commentary today. We'll take a break. Continue on right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. At the heart of religious liberty is the right to follow the faith of our choice. That means that no one, not even the United States Air Force, may force someone to follow any particular faith. But when Jeff Montanari converted to Orthodox Judaism, the Air Force treated him poorly. They rejected his application to be a Jewish chaplain, something the Air Force has a great need for at the present time. His superior officers were hostile towards him, excluding him from activities in order to drive him from the Air Force. He even received a litany of questions that questioned the sincerity of his conversion to Judaism. First Liberty sent a demand letter to the Air Force explaining that their job is to win wars, not question the legitimacy of someone's conversion. We believe the actions of a few Air Force officials to be unlawful discrimination. As the U.S. Supreme Court put it in Hobby v. Unemployment Appeals Commission of Florida, the First Amendment protects the free exercise rights of employees who convert from one faith to another after they are hired. In other words, religious liberty protects against discrimination even when you change your religion. Chaplain Montanari just wants to continue serving his country in accordance with his religious beliefs. We are confident that the Air Force can easily solve this problem and stand ready to assist in that process. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention, in the next hour, we're going to have O.S. Hawkins with us. New book called Nehemiah Code. And in case you're not familiar, here's like the Joshua Code, the Jesus Code, the Daniel Code, the James Code, as well as the Believer's Code. And those are just a few to give you just a sense of what we'll be talking about. And again, every one of these books is good for two reasons. Number one, it will really begin to minister to you in significant ways, and you will benefit from all the work that he has done over the years. But also, as we've pointed out, it is just a wonderful opportunity to minister to other individuals as well, because this is given to those individuals that actually have a need. It's called Mission Dignity, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get in with O.S. Hawkins. But let me just, for a few minutes before we run out of time in this hour, as we've talked about some of these issues in the news, one of the other guests that we have on the program with some regularity is Tom Gilson. And one of the things he wrote was, don't get used to this madness. And I think this would be something maybe we should even bring up with our Millennial Roundtable. When you grow up in America, and you can remember, as O.S. Hawkins and I will probably reminisce about what it was like in the 50s and 60s, but that's a different world than the world we're in right now. And for especially the younger listeners out there right now, you might just simply say, it's always been like this and it's never going to change. And Tom Gilson puts it this way: the world has gone mad. At least in America and most of the West, we're seeing insanity growing day by day. But he says, don't you dare get used to it. Don't sigh and tell yourself, well, that's another article on madness. We'll see that all the time. Granted, you don't have to react to despair to every article you see. He says, in fact, despair is the wrong response anyway. As I'll share in a moment, he says, don't let that lull you. Don't hide from the insanity. Don't treat it as a problem out there somewhere. And so then he makes a long list, and I'm hoping I won't wear you out with the list, but it's, I think, helpful to recognize how so many things have changed. Tom Gilson says, consider some American politicians, Maxine Waters for one, has openly called for violence against our own people. He says other more prominent politicians are tactically doing the same by remaining silent while violence increases. He says a man who says he's a woman is running for governor of his state. My statement that there makes me supposedly an intolerant, disrespectful person, for I'm not allowing them intolerantly, disrespectfully to force me into calling him a woman instead. I love that line. A couple more that Tom Gilson comes up with. Medical and educational professionals are telling parents they must comply with their preschool and grade school children's desire to be the other sex. We talked about one federal judge, you might remember, in Oregon, and I had just been in Dallas, Oregon, of all places, just a nice little community, where he said there is no right that a student has to not have his or her privacy invaded, and parents give up their rights over their kids when they enroll in the public schools. And that was a judge in Oregon, of all places. Let's take a few more. An openly admitted pedophile is running for Congress, and I'm not making that up. That is true. By the way, each one of these has a HTML link, so you can go and check it out, but I've already validated that one, too. Then the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you know how we talk about them so often, wants an American Army general arrested for having what they called weaponized Christianity. What does that mean? Well, he prays for people and has a Christian website. Okay. California is on the verge, which we've talked about as well, of passing a law making it illegal to sell products or services that encourage homosexuals to change. It's not the least bit clear that the Bible would be exempted from this prohibition. A couple more. He says responsible Christian ministries are labeled hate groups, how we've talked about this on the program, and large corporations, including important media and social media groups, take it seriously. American college students are willing to agree that if an average American man says he's a 6'5" Chinese woman, that's what he is. And again, that's a link to, if you haven't seen the YouTube video, just again, some of the things that are out there. So he goes through the list. I'll stop there because you probably are already getting an idea. But he says, don't get used to it. Are we getting used to it? Don't. It's madness. It's not hyperbole. It's not overstated. It is real. And I can validate for many about. You dare not get used to it. Sure, there's a sense in which it's becoming normal, meaning it's not unusual anymore. It's the way things commonly are these days. When we let this normality seem normal in any other way, though, that's when we're in danger of sliding into the insanity ourselves. So face it for what it is. Let the craziness of all of it burn into your mind and take action. So let's talk about the action. First of all, take the right action. What kind of action? He says, here's the other time you must reflect very deeply. He says, too often people react to insanity of one kind by practicing their own madness of another kind. They kick, they scream, they call names, they mount protests that turn violent, or conversely, they hide from it all, pretending it's not there and it doesn't affect them or their loved ones. He says, I've been reading Jeremiah lately. He's the prophet who saw Judah fall into pieces in a manner disturbingly parallel to America's madness today, and he's a great example for us. He says, help us champion the truth and freedom and limited government, human dignity by supporting, of course, the organization he's associated with. But again, he recognizes that when we look at Jeremiah, he knew the destruction that was coming, yet he remained hopeful in God. He trusted in God's redemptive purposes, even in the worst of times. He preached God's love and his promise. He stayed on course. 23 years as of the middle of the book, for example. So he says, don't dare get used to the madness, but don't let it knock your eyes off God either. Keep your eyes open to the whole reality, including the visible world and God's invisible workings. The world isn't done getting crazy as it's likely to become. Be clear-headed, be godly, be aware, and be a force for sanity in a world gone mad. So we have to get Tom Gilson on here again to talk about that. But his point and admonition is that sometimes we do talk about so many of these issues, and it can be overwhelming. I've had some people say, when I listen to your program, every once in a while I just got to turn it off because I just get kind of overwhelmed by it all. Imagine what I feel when I'm doing it every day. So that's part of the issue. But at the same time, I bring us back to something we mentioned just a few minutes ago, and that is we are calling for prayer. And again, you can go to ariseandpray.org, and this is something where they're calling for 40 days of prayer for the college campus. And if you have a young person going off to college, I know you would want to be praying for them and praying for their campus. But all of us, I think, should be doing that. And as I mentioned, we have that link at ariseandpray.org. But also, of course, we had Nick Pitts on yesterday with our Millennial Roundtable, and I noticed that his daily briefing features that as well. A lot of the great revivals took place as a result of, in many cases, students praying. And so we certainly need to pray for the campuses, and certainly pray that we had a first great awakening before the American Revolution. We had a second great awakening. Of course, we had the Haystack Revival, which I just mentioned a minute ago. We had the Layman's Prayer Revival. And, of course, we have seen some dramatic outbursts of God's Spirit working first with Billy Graham, even now with some of these crusades with Greg Laurie. So let me encourage you to pray. But most importantly, as Tom Gilson reminds us, keep clear-headed and make sure that even if you're looking horizontally, you can certainly get depressed. But if you look vertically, you will be blessed. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk with our good friend O.S. Hawkins. He'll be in studio with us. And so I would encourage you to go to our website. We have information about the new book, the Nehemiah Code. It's never too late for a new beginning. And this is, I think, another very helpful look at the book of Nehemiah. Sometimes we talk about Nehemiah in terms of leadership, but this time we're going to talk about rebuilding and how important that is, and how you can rebuild your life, rebuild your ministry, even rebuild your church. So Dr. O.S. Hawkins will be with us. Looking forward to that opportunity, and that will happen right after these messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking with our good friend Dr. O.S. Hawkins, an individual that we've enjoyed having on this program many times before. You knew him, of course, as a pastor at First Baptist Church in Fort Lauderdale, First Baptist Church in Dallas, and, of course, now is the president of Guidestone Financial Resources. 3 earned degrees, a number of honorary degrees. Last time you were here, you were saying you're working on your Ph.D.
Yeah, I'm doing another doctorate in my old age.
It's just amazing. Yeah. So I'm just so impressed. And if you have followed O.S. Hawkins in studio with us before, we've talked about the Joshua Code, the Jesus Code, as well as the James Code, the Daniel Code, the Believer's Code, and today, Nehemiah Code. And we might just point out, as we always do, Mission Dignity, because this is an incredible series. You're going to have to give us the latest numbers here on how many of these books have sold, but the profits and the proceeds go to Mission Dignity. Explain more.
Yeah, Kerby, these are all devotional books. We started with the Joshua Code, 52 scripture verses every believer should know. You take a verse a week, memorize it. There are devotional guides there for it. The Jesus Code, 52 scripture questions every believer ought to answer. I believe there are 52 questions asked in the Bible that we ought to be able to have an answer for before we go to heaven. So the Code series are all devotionals seeking to help us all grow in the knowledge of Christ. You know, the Bible is a big book for a lot of people that have never gotten into it. And so they start reading maybe in Genesis, and they get bogged down by the time they get to Leviticus for sure. Or they may start in the New Testament at Matthew and can't pronounce half the names they find in chapter 1. So what I've done is I've written these code books to help people get into the Word of God. And they've been, as you mentioned, all the royalties go to Mission Dignity, so I don't mind telling you that they've sold between 1 million and 1.5 million copies in the last 4 years, and every dime of those royalties have gone to support Mission Dignity. We're on a mission at Guidestone to bring dignity to some forgotten folks, and that is retired pastors, and 60% of our program are widows of pastors in their declining years. They pastored out in the crossroads somewhere where they were often seemingly forgotten, never had enough money to live on, much less provide for retirement, lived in a church-owned home, had to get out of it. And now we're faced with several thousand of them that are living down there at the poverty level or below and in need of hope and help. And so Mission Dignity comes alongside of them. 10 years ago, we were able to give them $50 a month that helped them. But now we've been able to raise so much money that the neediest among them get $600 a month. And as one little 87-year-old pastor's widow wrote me recently, she said, I get to eat at night now, and it's not just a piece of toast.
Yes.
So every time someone purchases one of these code books, they're supporting these precious soldiers of the cross and their widows in their declining years. And, you know, the Bible says, Kerby and James, that's close to the heart of God, because he says, pure and undefiled religion is this, to take care of orphans and widows.
And again, I just appreciate what you do there. And I might just mention to Guidestone individuals that maybe are interested in having their investments in things that don't raise moral questions or are appropriate. So that is certainly a place to think about. And we have some links there for people to find that. And again, I just so value these books. One, because when I purchase those, I know that they're going to Mission Dignity, and that's certainly worthwhile. And you know as well as I do, I am a real fan of O.S. Hawkins, and many a times I've quoted you in messages, sermons, Sunday school classes, even commentaries and things like that. And every once in a while when I dip into one of these books, as I have on many occasions, because you can see each one of them have gotten some use right there, I find myself saying, oh, I remember when you preached a sermon on that. Now I've got all the documentation. And this one is the Nehemiah Code. It's never too late for a new beginning. Now, let's talk about that, because early on in the book, you talk about the fact that you were in two very significant pastorates, two First Baptists. Right. But one in Fort Lauderdale, you were kind of starting that one from scratch in a kind of a secular cosmopolitan area. But at First Baptist Dallas, well, you were actually following some of the great saints that had been there before. Right. And as a result, you had to talk about the idea of kind of rebuilding. And so really Nehemiah is about rebuilding, isn't it?
It is. You know, when you're building something, a lot of times it's easier to plant a church and build a church than it is to rebuild one, for example. Because when you're building, there are just a lot of things to do. When you're rebuilding, there are some things to undo as well as to do. And the truth is, everybody's in need of a new beginning. There are individuals that are out there. Maybe they've been through a divorce or the death of a spouse or loss of self-confidence or loss of a job, or maybe they're beginning college or going out into their first job. Everybody, all of us, are about new beginnings. And the message of the book is, no matter who we are, where we are, what we've done, it's never too late for a new beginning. And, you know, it's true in churches. Churches, we hear a lot about church planting, but what we really need, too, is church revitalization. And there are a lot of churches seeking to rebuild, businesses trying to rebuild, athletic teams seeking to rebuild. So the principles in here are applicable to so many needs, not just personal needs, but business needs and church needs and everything else, because again, it's just never too late for a new beginning.
And again, I know that you are in a busy media schedule, so we won't wear your voice out too much, but let me just mention real quickly that we'll just do a light touch on the 6 categories. Right. One is rebuilding, getting started right. Rebuilders actually build a team spirit. Rebuilders let go without letting up, and that one is a really fascinating series of chapters. Then rebuilders understand YAC, which is yards after contact, which I understand. And then rebuilders never cut what they can't untie, and that's a fun story about a kid that never would untie his shoes.
True story.
And then rebuilders finish strong. So before we take a break, let me just mention that there are actually 24 chapters, and so there are 6 sections, and this idea of starting right is really part of it. You make an honest evaluation, you identify the need. That's really what Nehemiah was doing, right?
Exactly. And, you know, if we're going to ever rebuild our lives or rebuild something about us, getting started is what's most difficult. If we're on a diet, getting started is one of the toughest things about it. And I play a lot of golf, Kerby, and the most important shot in golf is the tee shot. Yeah. It's your first shot off the tee. If you topple it off the tee just a few yards and barely hit it, you're not going to make a par. Yeah. If you hit it in the woods, you hook it, you slice it. But if you hit it straight down the fairway, a distance where you positioned yourself to get on the green, then you're going to be able to make par. And so the first shot is most important. And that's what we talk about is how important it is to get started right.
Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll talk about the idea of team spirit and the teams. We'll talk about this idea of you didn't skip chapter 3 with all the names. That's kind of interesting. And then we'll get into John Madden. I certainly have been a fan of his, and after he retired as a coach, actually lived in the same town I did, which is kind of interesting, a little footnote, and yards after contact and what that means. I got to tell the story about the shoes, really a fun story. And then finishing strong, we'll talk about Billy Graham and Chuck Colson. And then we'll let O.S. Hawkins go on to his next activity. So if you are interested in this book, about 200 pages, but it's in a short format, and it's leather-bound, it's just a great resource. You've already got a lot of advanced orders for it. So
I heard yesterday over 40,000 people have already ordered it. It comes out this next week, so you can get it now.
So make your order, and you'll have one soon. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, the tech giants Facebook, Apple, and YouTube announced that they would ban the content of Alex Jones. At the same time, Twitter's Jack Dorsey explained that Alex Jones had not violated Twitter's rule, and the tech platform would act impartially regardless of political viewpoints. When I heard that he made that statement, I said on radio that he was about to face a huge backlash. I was right. Although he faced criticism from the outside, the most potent came from his fellow employees. A Twitter vice president sent out an email promising to take appropriate steps to help customers feel safe concerning potential hate speech, and Alex Jones was eventually banned. David French, in a recent commentary, reminds us that the internal mob in these tech companies is what makes a difference. There may be online outrage and a huge backlash from progressives, but the swift judgment is most effective when there are internal forces in the tech companies. He reminds us of the decision by Google to fire James Damore. Executives did so in part because employees reacted to his memo and demanded an inclusive environment. Kevin Williamson didn't last long at The Atlantic because of fears that he would negatively affect workplace relationships. All of this is important to remember when the tech giants promise to be more open-minded and to defend free speech. They have essentially formed a digital cartel that is rigorously ruled by a progressive corporate culture. Students who graduate from universities that ban conservative speakers and promote identity politics populate these tech companies. They punish their own if they stray from the progressive catechism, so it's highly unlikely that they will ever promote true free speech on their platform. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. O.S. Hawkins in studio with us for a few more minutes. Let me just mention again, he is the president of Guidestone Financial Resources. We have a link to his website, information, of course, about this new book, the Nehemiah Code. Let me recommend to you all of these, the Joshua Code, the Jesus Code, the James Code, the Daniel Code, Believer's Code. I think you have a Christmas Code coming out, don't I know?
Christmas Code came out last year at Kerby. It sold 400,000 copies. It's unbelievable.
Every time I turn around, there's another one.
It's a great Advent devotional that churches use to share the gospel. The Christmas Code. Then we have the Easter Code coming out for Lent.
That's right. You got that one
that'll be out in the spring. So we're very excited about both of those. But right now, we're really excited about the Nehemiah Code on New Beginnings.
Well, again, the second section talks about rebuilders build a team spirit. And, you know, I've had people, OS, in this studio talk about the fact that almost everything of significance that I ever was able to accomplish happened as a result of a team.
Right.
And, of course, we're going to have Coach Tony Dungy in here. And, of course, we know the value of a sports team and teams that are put together. But this, I think, is important because Nehemiah didn't sit here and say, you know, how am I going to do all of this? He changed the pronoun. How are we going to do all of that? That's very important.
It's very important for leaders to use the personal pronoun.
Yes.
And not just verbally, but in practice. And he did say we a lot. Nehemiah did. And he was faced with a great challenge to rebuild the broken walls of Jerusalem, the burned gates that had been left like that for scores of years. And the work had started earlier, but they had gotten so discouraged they quit. He came back, motivated the people, and within 52 days accomplished an incredible task because he built a team spirit. And, you know, if I had a pencil, Kerby, I could break it very easily by itself. But if I put two or three of them together, it's exponentially more difficult to break. We call that synergy.
Right.
And that's what happens with a team. As the Bible says, one can chase 1,000, but two, 10,000.
Yeah.
So there's a synergistic principle to when we can do so much more together.
Well, and again, one of the other sections you have is rebuilders let go without letting up. And I thought that was interesting because chapter 3 of the book of Nehemiah, we all know, you get to that and you go, I think I'm going to skip that because I can't even pronounce half the names because it's kind of a who's who. But you focus a couple of chapters on that because it's the idea of setting objectives, picking the right people, holding people accountable. And that's back to teamwork as well, isn't it?
No question about it, Kerby. In fact, some of my friends, some of the most well-known authors in this country have written on Nehemiah and completely omitted chapter 3.
I noticed that.
But it is incredibly important because what I call it is if you're going to rebuild a team or a business or a church or whatever, you need that team spirit. But then you need to know about the principle of delegation.
Yes.
I call it letting go without letting up. And that's really what Nehemiah was about. He let go without letting up. He assigned specific tasks with specific objectives. He picked the right people for the right job. You know, a lot of times we never get rebuilt because we got the wrong people in the right place or the right people in the wrong place. And he did all that. But another thing he did, he was an example himself.
That's true.
And the way we motivate people to rebuild is to be an example ourselves. The greatest principle of leadership in the Bible or out of the Bible, I think, is over in Judges 7 with Gideon. When it says of Gideon, he got his army down to 300 people to go out and fight the Midianite hosts of thousands, so outnumbered.
Yes.
And the last thing he said to them before they went out in Judges 7:7, he turned around to them and he looked at them and he said this, we're about to go out to battle. And then he said this, do as I do. That's the greatest principle of leadership because ultimately people do as we do as leaders. Yeah. And so this is where Nehemiah, he didn't dictate like bark orders like some people. He didn't abdicate, just give an assignment and never check on it. He held them accountable. But another important thing he did in delegation was he gave people a pat on the back. You look at him in chapter 3, he's going up and down the lines of people rebuilding. He's reaching out, patting them on the back, encouraging them. He knows where they're from. He knows who they are. He knows what their task is, and he's giving encouragement. I think affirmation is the greatest motivating factor in the world.
I think so.
And this is what Jesus did. He went around affirming people. He saw a woman at a well, hadn't had a word of affirmation in who knows when, and told her of living water. He saw a woman taken in adultery one time, and he reached down, patted her on the back, and he said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. He believed in her, and he gave her a word of affirmation. On the cross, he reached over and patted a guy on the back next to him on the cross, said, today you're going to be with me in paradise. In fact, even when he was baptized, the Father reached down from heaven, patted him on the back, said, this is my beloved Son, in him I'm well pleased. Well, that moves me and motivates me to want to rebuild.
Yes. One of the other sections is the idea of rebuilders actually understand YAC, and that's really what really matters. And YA stands for something John Madden created, yards after contact. And this is really just a wonderful section on perseverance. There were a lot of naysayers in the life of Nehemiah. And I live in that world where, if somebody says, well, I've got a criticism of you, I said, just take a number because, I get a lot of those emails. But he, in the midst of that, recognized that just because somebody hits you, to use a football illustration, doesn't mean you stop. You just keep going. And we can think of some of these individuals like John Riggins and others that just never could get stops. Yards after contact is really important, isn't it?
It's an acronym, as you mentioned, initiated by John Madden when he was doing the color commentary on television one day. It's yards after contact. It's when that running back gets hit or comes into contact with an opposing player on the defense, and it's the yards he makes after he's hit. And so what that means is the guy gets hit. He doesn't just crumble to the ground or fumble the ball. He keeps moving forward. He keeps going. This is what separates others from some others in the rebuilding process of our individual lives, that not getting knocked down. When we get hit, to just keep moving forward.
Yeah, and again, he talks about dealing with conflict and rallying the troops and all those. But in the interest of time, let me at least get to one other one. Rebuilders never cut what they can untie. When I first saw that, I thought, I don't even understand what that means. And I turn the page, and you're telling the story of when you were playing baseball, and we're talking about like sandlot baseball. We're talking about a vacant lot,
yeah, exactly.
And you had one kid that showed up, and he oftentimes didn't have all of his shoelaces up to the top of the shoe. Explain the story.
Right. He was a kid on our block. We played on that old vacant lot as kids, and he would come to the ball field, and he would have those high-top black, I'm going back to the 50s.
Oh,
now.
I know. The
he
Converse.
would have those high, no, we didn't have Converse. We had U.S. kids. We couldn't afford Converse. But he had those high-top canvas shoes, black canvas shoes, and he would only have them laced up about halfway because every time he got a knot in his shoelaces, this kid was so impatient that in the library of impatient people, he's way up on the top shelf. And so instead of taking the time to untie the knot, he'd pull out his pocket knife and just cut the knot off and tie it where it was. And so that's the way a lot of people deal with relationships.
Yes, that's right.
Because conflict will tear our team apart, and it'll keep us from rebuilding. And so a lot of people, it seems to be easier for them to untie the knots of broken relationships to just go ahead and cut them off. And that's why some people just go in life from one relationship to another to another. And so this whole chapter, Nehemiah tells us how important it is to never cut what we can untie. That is, that conflict resolution is a vital and valuable part of rebuilding anything.
I might just mention the last one is about rebuilders finishing strong. You got some great stories about Billy Graham, but also Chuck Colson, who had to rebuild his life as well. Right. But I wanted to leave the last minute or two to just talk about what you do at Guidestone. We've had people before say, I would really like to make sure that my investment is not going for pornography or alcohol or a number of other things. And every time somebody says that to me, I said, have you ever checked into Guidestone? Talk about that.
Right. Well, Guidestone, we have our own mutual funds, almost $16 billion. We've been in business for 100 years. I'm the 7th president. We serve 40,000 churches. We serve hundreds of universities, Christian universities and hospitals, with their retirement, investment, endowment, insurance needs. And now our funds are open to the public, Guidestone funds. And so they're on platforms everywhere. Anyone can go in. We don't invest in companies that are publicly recognized to be involved in alcohol, gambling, tobacco, et cetera. And just a few years ago, we got the #1 fund in America, recognized by Morningstar and Lipper in New York. So we're proving that you don't have to compromise your beliefs and still have performance. So it's a great opportunity for people that really want to invest along with their values.
Guidestone Financial Resources. You can find out more. And you're in a new building too, aren't you?
We are. We just moved into a new building this last Monday. We have 460 folks working in there. It's a large organization, but we've been able to save $3 million a year out of our budget with this move. So we're really excited about the efficiencies that have been created through it.
Well, again, O.S. Hawkins, I value my friendship with you, and thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby, for letting me remind everybody it's never too late for a new beginning. Anybody that needs one, you can go to oshawkins.com and learn more about all the ministry and the books that are there.
And we have that link on our website. Again, Nehemiah Code. It's never too late for a new beginning. We'll let you rest your voice and get on to your next media connection right after these important messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, and I might just mention that my commentary today is called The Internal Mob, and that relates to one of the articles I'm going to read about in just a minute that's on our website, pointofview.net. And, of course, if you're just with us, we talked with our good friend Dr. O.S. Hawkins. Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy are already here, and we'll get them on in about a half an hour. So, again, some great material that we are covering today as we talk about different books, different authors. And if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And in my commentary today, I call it the internal mob. And the reason for that is that you may remember earlier this month we had a number of tech giants, that's Facebook and Apple and YouTube and others, announce that they were going to actually ban the content of Alex Jones. Let's just face it, those of us around the table don't have a lot to say for him, but nevertheless, the point that I really want to make is not that, but that during that announcement, Twitter's CEO, Jack Dorsey, said that they were not necessarily going to do the same thing, that Alex Jones had not violated, he said, Twitter's rule. And so the tech platform, at least at the time, said that they would act impartially regardless of political viewpoints. Well, when I heard that, I knew what was going to happen next, and that is there was going to be a backlash, and I was right. But it wasn't just the backlash from, for example, the progressives and others, but it was primarily what brought about the remarkable change was from his fellow employees. As a matter of fact, one of the vice presidents at Twitter sent out an email promising to take appropriate steps to help customers feel safe concerning potential hate speech. And, of course, eventually they did ban Alex Jones, or at least put him on time out, I guess would be a way to say it. But nevertheless, David French, I'm going to quote again in just a minute, was saying in one of his commentaries that it's the internal mob at these high-tech companies that makes the difference, that there may be online outrage, there may be a backlash from liberals, progressives, whoever it might be, but the judgment almost always, the swift action almost comes when you have people internally that motivate that. And some examples that we can use, you might remember when Google decided to fire James Damore. You know, he'd put out this memo, but it's when people in the Google organization that demanded that he be fired because they wanted an inclusive environment. Or Kevin Williamson, who I sometimes quote. Matter of fact, I think I quoted him the other day. You know, he went to Atlantic, but he didn't last there long because there were fears from the employees that he would negatively affect workplace relationships. And so the point I'm making is that right now we have the so-called digital cartel determining what is or isn't appropriate on their platforms. And again, they're private companies, so they have that freedom. But as we'll find out in just a minute, it's sometimes the internal mob that makes the difference. And that brings me to one of the articles we've posted on our website, pointofview.net. The article is entitled Corporate Gun Control. It's a piece written by David French entitled Corporate Gun Control Might Be the Worst Threat to Gun Rights. And he really kind of has good news, bad news. Good news is, he says, let's be honest, if you own guns or are a gun rights supporter, or if you're concerned about government restrictions on your Second Amendment rights, the future looks bright. The elevation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court may well represent the death knell for draconian forms of gun control, including bans on so-called assault weapons, bans on standard capacity magazines, and other things. He says, moreover, meaningful federal gun control has been blocked for a generation, and red state legislatures are moving almost uniformly to liberalize gun laws. Witness, for example, the steady stream and spread of constitutional carry. So that's the good news. But the bad news, which is what I'm going to focus on now for this next segment here, is this. He says another threat looms, one that can stretch across the entire American landscape, and it is immune to filibuster and is largely sheltered from judicial review. And he says it's a threat that can choke off financing for gun industry, stifle speech about guns, and lock the gun rights community into offline and maybe small online ghettos that restrict their ability to communicate. And what he's talking about here is there are individuals in the banking industry and in the communications industry that are taking steps to restrict the use of funds or the platforms by gun makers, gun rights advocates, and others. And he says the threat is just now emerging, but it may be as great a danger to gun rights as it is the culture of free speech in the nation, because, as he points out, the two are linked. Now, if you're taking some notes, and I know sometimes people listening to Point of View like to take some notes or like to find these articles and then make some notes, you might number 1 to 2, and I'm going to talk about 2 examples in the banking industry. That would be Citigroup and Bank of America. And then you can number like 1 to 4, and I'll give you 4 examples from his article about what's happening with these platforms. Let's first of all talk about Citigroup. And this comes from an article that came out that said Citigroup is setting restrictions on the sale of firearms by its business customers, making it the first Wall Street bank to take a stance in the divisive nationwide gun control debate. The new policy announced prohibits, the sale of firearms to customers who have not passed a background check or who are younger than 21. It also bars the sale of bump stocks and high-capacity magazines. It would apply to clients who offer credit cards backed by Citigroup or borrow money using banking services or raise capital through the company. Now, we've already sort of seen that. I've talked about this in previous programs where individuals that maybe had a gun store found that the bank would no longer allow them to get a loan. Or now we're starting to see maybe we won't even allow you to use that credit card at your gun shop. So that's the first thing that's sort of surfacing in that regard. The other one, number one is Citigroup. Number two, Bank of America. Bank of America said it will stop lending money to gun manufacturers that make military-inspired firearms for civilian use, such as AR-15 style rifles and things of that nature. So you can see the development of this already with Citigroup and Bank of America, 1 and 2. Then let's look at 1 through 4. And that is, first of all, number one, looks at Facebook. He says Facebook has recently restricted any links to a website called Code is Free Speech, which contains downloadable plans for a number of entirely legal firearms, including 3D printable firearms. And a lot of that goes back to the conversation we've had here about the Obama administration's preventing the publishing of those materials by Cody Wilson. The site also includes plans for weapons such as a Colt 911, a weapon so common and so basic that its plans date well back to, might be 1911, well, actually even before that, and you can even buy plans on a T-shirt. So that's Facebook, number one. Number two, YouTube. YouTube has its own restrictions on speech about firearms and prohibits any content that intends to sell firearms or provides information on manufacturing a firearm. And again, I've used that sometimes if we want to know how to put a particular firearm together, take it apart, clean it, whatever. That relates to what could affect even things like cleaning and maintenance. Number three would be Reddit. Reddit has banned certain gun forums and updated its policy to forbid using Reddit to solicit or facilitate, he says an extremely broad term, transactions or gifts involving firearms. Its policy applies to gun sales, drug sales, prostitution, stolen goods, personal information, counterfeit official documents. As he says, one of those things is not like the other. What would that be? Oh, I think that would be like gun sales, which is put in the same category as prostitution and drug sales. Really? And then the final one, just to be complete, number four, the Amazon Web Services has decided again to remove codeisfreespeech.com from its web surfers. Also, Shopify has updated its free speech policies to deny space for the kind of products intended to harm. And the point he's making here is that what we have right now is not something that's the culmination of like gun control campaign, but actually the front edge of what could be corporate censorship and suppression. As he says, as I've written before, in the age of online outrage, you can find angry mobs on both sides of virtually every issue. But what's most important is the internal mob, the thing that I talk about today in my commentary. Tech executives at these multinational companies care more about the opinions of their peers and colleagues than they care about any Twitter trend or news cycle. And he says when companies reach a certain size, the ability of angry conservatives to affect the market is limited. And I thought it was interesting that I was talking to someone the other day who's a board member of the NRA about this. And he said, no, well, we just noticed that's happening in New York. And I'm thinking, no, it's happening in a lot more places than in New York. And it's something that you really need to pay attention to. And so he says, if nothing else, we need to make our best arguments here and now. But it's imperative for gun rights proponents to play the corporate long game, just as they did in some of their other successes. So let me open up the phones. I'd love to know your thoughts about this. Is it possible that even if gun control advocates can't pass policies, can't even get judges sometimes to rule in their favor, is it possible that maybe some of these banking companies, maybe some of these communication companies might be able to achieve what couldn't be achieved legislatively? Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break. Back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. At the heart of religious liberty is the right to follow the faith of our choice. That means that no one, not even the United States Air Force, may force someone to follow any particular faith. But when Jeff Montanari converted to Orthodox Judaism, the Air Force treated him poorly. They rejected his application to be a Jewish chaplain, something the Air Force has a great need for at the present time. His superior officers were hostile towards him, excluding him from activities in order to drive him from the Air Force. He even received a litany of questions that questioned the sincerity of his conversion to Judaism. First Liberty sent a demand letter to the Air Force explaining that their job is to win wars, not question the legitimacy of someone's conversion. We believe the actions of a few Air Force officials to be unlawful discrimination. As the U.S. Supreme Court put it in Hobby v. Unemployment Appeals Commission of Florida, the First Amendment protects the free exercise rights of employees who convert from one faith to another after they are hired. In other words, religious liberty protects against discrimination even when you change your religion. Chaplain Montanari just wants to continue serving his country in accordance with his religious beliefs. We are confident that the Air Force can easily solve this problem and stand ready to assist in that process. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that we'll have Coach Tony Dungy in studio with us today, as well as Lauren, and we're going to be talking about their new children's books, but also give you a chance if you have a comment or a question. We are going to be talking about that, and let me just mention again, we've posted this article, Corporate Gun Control Might Be the Worst Threat to Gun Rights, and also one that we've posted on Manafort and Cohen. What does it mean? And that has to do with Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, and a piece by Mike Huckabee. But let's take a phone call or two, and we'll go to Georgia, first of all, on the GNN network. Reginald, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. You're on the air. Well, we seem to be having some trouble getting him on the air, so let me put him on hold here. We'll see if we get him back here in just a minute. And I wanted to talk about the whole idea of controlling ammunition. That's one of the issues that people have been talking about as well. But just before we do so, let me just mention real quickly this piece by Mike Huckabee I thought was kind of a good summary. Yesterday, if you were listening to our program, especially during kind of our Millennial Roundtable, we certainly felt the importance of talking about two issues because, as we well know, Paul Manafort was convicted of 8 counts out of the 18. And, of course, you also have then Michael Cohen, who actually pled guilty to 8 counts of felony. So these are some issues that obviously are important, and I thought it was a really good summary here, which I'll get to in just a minute as soon as we get back and pick up some of the phone calls. But it had to do with, first of all, does this at all, in terms of the actual decisions, bring us back to the issue of Russian collusion? And I don't think that we have any evidence of that. And at the same time, also wanted to help us understand a little bit more about what this might mean. And so, as Mike Huckabee says, on Tuesday afternoon, on the heels of a jury verdict, matter of fact, a partial verdict in the Paul Manafort case, that could send Manafort to prison for the rest of his life, even though it had nothing to do with Donald Trump or Russian collusion, it was revealed that Michael Cohen had accepted a plea deal in a case that has been moved by the special counsel to the Southern District of New York. That prompted President Trump's personal lawyer, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, to issue this statement. And here's what Rudy Giuliani had to say. There is no allegation of any wrongdoing against the president in the government's charges against Mr. Cohen. It is clear that, as the prosecutor noted, Mr. Cohen's actions reflected a pattern of lies and dishonesty over a significant period of time. So back in March, Cohen told Vanity Fair that Trump didn't know he'd paid Stephanie Clifford, who goes by that name Stormy Daniels, $130,000 out of his own pocket. He had said the same thing to the New York Times a month earlier. So it's kind of interesting because then Mike Huckabee says significantly Cohen's plea deal departs from what he had previously claimed and from what Giuliani had said about no campaign laws being broken, because it specifies that he broke the law to influence the 2016 election in the direction of a candidate. That candidate, of course, would be Donald Trump. But Cohen's statements, as legal expert Andrew McCarthy noted, has been all over the map. For example, he even theorized that the Cohen case ended up on the Southern District of New York because Mueller didn't think it would advance his Russia investigation. Cohen hasn't entered into a cooperation agreement, he explained, but rather a straight-up guilty plea. If Cohen were regarded as a valuable witness or cooperator, he said, we'd be seeing a very different kind of plea agreement. He says, I'm assuming that means one that doesn't call for any jail time. So again, Andrew McCarthy, who's been on the program with us before, also said, I don't think anybody objective could look at the way that the Clinton email investigation was handled and the way the Trump campaign has been pursued and say that there's a single standard of justice. I just don't see how that could be. At the same time, he doesn't want Mueller taking the reins of that particular area, because now we have a U.S. attorney in Utah which is looking into the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And so if nothing else, felt that maybe that would be the better way to go. Well, if nothing else, Mike Huckabee kind of winds it down by saying this. It can't be said enough, as far as we've come in this investigation with people being sent to prison to perhaps rot there, nothing ties President Trump with any attempt by Russia to interfere in the 2016 election. On the other hand, plenty of evidence ties Hillary Clinton with Russians who contributed to the fictional dossier compiled by British ex-spy Christopher Steele for the purpose of interfering in the 2016 election. As I said yesterday, if you're looking for evidence of a two-tiered justice system, Hillary is Exhibit A. But I agree with Andrew McCarthy that Mueller shouldn't take over the Hillary case. We'll let someone else do that as well. And he says, speaking of Hillary, Mark Levin on his radio program pointed out that longtime Clinton general counsel Lanny Davis, who just happened by complete coincidence to be representing Michael Cohen, had Cohen plead guilty to 2 campaign finance violations that don't actually exist. Besides that, such a plea bargain is a deal made with a criminal who doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in prisons. In other words, not very believable, and applies only to his specific case. Since it hasn't been adjudicated, it can't be cited as a precedent to use against Trump. Mark Levin went on to explain that according to campaign law, if someone spends his own money, or even corporate money, on something that occurs not as a result of the campaign, is not a campaign expenditure, even if it might affect the outcome of an election. For example, maybe a candidate wants to pay off a lot of debt, get a new road warp, or have extensive dental work, or reimburse the payment with his own money. Those are not campaign expenditures, even if they might help the candidate win some votes. So according to Mark Levin, even if Trump directed Cohen to make payments to Stormy Daniels as part of a non-disclosure agreement, it's legal for him to do so. Anyway, we may not agree with that, but nevertheless, that's what we find. And then, just to be fair, Mike Huckabee says, though, Alan Dershowitz has a slightly different take. And again, Alan Dershowitz been on this program as well. He says, Alan Dershowitz says that if a payment is originally made by someone else, a case might be made that it's technically an unreported campaign contribution, which he likened to jaywalking, even if it's reimbursed later. Of course, either way, it doesn't matter to those who hate Trump, including those on the special counsel team. They'll just go whatever they've got and use it any way they can. So that's another piece by Mike Huckabee that I thought might be helpful for you to understand there as well. When we come back from the break, we want to spend some time talking with Tony and Lauren Dungy. They have a series of books, which I think you're going to find fascinating. These are children's books. Austin Plays Fair and Maria Finds Courage. But I might also spend a few minutes as well talking about some of the other books that they have written together. Uncommon Marriage, certainly one that comes to mind. And of course, that goes all the way back to many of the books by Tony Dungy on Uncommon Life, Uncommon, The Mentor Leader, Quiet Strength, and many others. So we've got a lot to cover today. But if you find yourself wanting to maybe find a little bit more about some of the guests that we have had on the program, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. First of all, we have a link to O.S. Hawkins, and his website is oshawkins.com. So there you can watch a video, you can see his books, and I would encourage you again to think about investing in the Nehemiah Code. It's a way to help mission dignity and just an outstanding way to really begin to help those who have served so well in missions and in ministry, but now certainly have a financial need. And then we have a link to Tony Dungy's website. It's called teamdungy.com. And so you can find out more about all sorts of books and resources that are available. And we're going to talk about not only some of the ways in which you can sign up for that, but I might even mention for some of you, there'll be book signings for those of you in the Dallas area. They'll be at Barnes & Noble at Northwest Highway on Friday, August 24th, and on Saturday, August 25th at the Mardell Bookstore in Arlington, Texas. So there's just a lot of opportunities for you to meet them face-to-face, but you'll have a chance to meet them when they come in studio right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. This hour we're going to spend some time talking with Tony and Lauren Dungy. Also have a good friend, Jeremy Dice, who joins us on a pretty regular basis as well. And if you are not familiar with them, and I would imagine you are, but Tony Dungy, of course, is best known as an NFL coach, NFL Hall of Fame. We are going to also be a little bit later at least mentioning some of his other books: Quiet Strength, Mentor, Leader, and Uncommon, to mention a few. And, of course, Tony and Lauren have also written a book called Uncommon Marriage, which I appreciate as well. We're going to be talking about the children books, but let me also mention Lauren is an early childhood educational specialist with a degree in elementary education, and so we have a lot to cover. Tony Dungy, just thank you for being in studio with us today.
No, thank you. It is awesome to be here.
I think everybody that's watching right now is a fan of yours and a fan of the NFL and a fan of your commentaries and all the rest, so it's been great. And again, your books, Uncommon, Uncommon Life, Mentor, Leader, Quiet Strength, just to mention a few, have been so helpful for those of us that have been in men's ministry. So thank you for that. But Lauren, I'm just thrilled to meet you for the first time, and I know you've had a lot to do with these books. So give us some of your background, if you might.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And Tony and I have been married for 36 years. And so I feel like I'm involved in the sports industry as well. But I do have, I do work with kids in the community, and I taught school in the inner city for 6 years.
Yes.
And then I went on to do a lot of volunteer work, and now we are
11.
And we have a foster child as well. So I'm busy.
Yes, you are.
Just loving it.
Well, one of the things I want to hold up, again, for people that are watching online, you can see some of these. This one is Austin Plays Fair, and I have Maria Finds Courage. And, of course, the Team Dungy books have been coming out for some time. Can you kind of give us an overview? These are the newest ones that have just come out, and these have more of a sports emphasis, but you have others about bullying and things like that. So tell us a little bit more about some of the Team Dungy, because we have a link to teamdungy.com.
Well, the Team Dungy books are the two that you referred to, Maria Finds Courage and Austin Plays Fair. And they're the two books that we've written, we've collaborated together, and they are sports themed, and both books use characters that are involved in sports, and they have to learn how to navigate through a challenge or a struggle. And they've got coaches and mentors and friends to kind of help them along the way. So those are our two latest books from this series. We have written some other books with another series, and they, of course, touch on subjects like bullying, how to be a good friend, and just honesty, and just doing a lot of things that are important, that subjects that need to be discussed that many times we don't take the time to talk with our children about. And we thought it was very important to talk about those things.
Well, a little bit later, I want to talk about coaches, and that's one of the reasons why I brought Jeremy in here, because we really want to encourage people to pray for their coaches, pray for these football teams. And just earlier, we even talked about the 40 days of prayer for kids going off to college, so we're going to certainly emphasize that. But I thought for a few minutes we would talk about some of these books. And I guess the first thing, Tony, maybe you need to explain this. I remember when I did flag football, some people could sort of finagle the flags. And for some of us that have played flag football, we'll understand the premise of the book. But explain that for just a minute, because Austin gets told by one of these boys that, you know, there's a way you can cheat, and that is you can tie these flags around your belt in such a way that people can't pull the flag. So explain that if you might.
Yeah, Austin is on a football team that's not doing very well. They've lost all their games. and they're practicing hard but just can't seem to win. One of the players says, hey, I saw other teams do this. We can tuck our flags in, pin them in there, so even if the other team gets it, they won't be able to pull them out. So Austin has to make a decision. Does he try to win? Does he, hey, I'm on the team, so I need to be a good teammate. I need to fit in. Or I don't feel right about this. Should I say something? And that's a dilemma a lot of kids face, not necessarily just on a sports team, but in life. Hey, this is what the group's doing. I don't feel so great about this. What should I do?
Yes. And Lauren, that's where I think we're talking about team sports. We're talking about sportsmanship. There's a lot of lessons in this short little book, aren't there?
There definitely are lessons to be learned from reading the story and just reminding boys and girls when they play, it's not always about winning. It's learning how to be a good teammate. And we think that is a message that you can't emphasize enough. And many times the kids get out there and they play, and the first thing you hear is, well, who won?
Yes.
What was the score?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no mention about how much fun you had and the team work that you did together to accomplish this. So we really wanted to remind boys and girls, when you play, enjoy yourselves, have a good time. But you don't always have to win. And we know our children are guilty of that. When they get out there and play, that's the first thing they want to tell us. We won, or the score was so, and I made, so many touchdowns. And that's wonderful. That's great. But oftentimes we overlook the more important lesson.
Yeah. And there is going to be peer pressure, too.
For sure.
For
right.
all of our kids. Hey, this is what the other guys say. We need to do this. So I should go along with it, even though I don't really believe in it. And how do you handle that? And Austin, in the book, he ends up talking to his coaches, talking to his parents, and then coming to the conclusion, I need to do the right thing, not what everybody else is doing.
Austin is the good kid. Bryce is the bad one that comes up with that. And, one of the things that I appreciate when we used to do radio and we would talk about books, especially with such great graphics, is nobody could see them. But, of course, we have a camera here right now. And I might just hold this up and say, does these people look like anybody that you might know? And that is, they have done a very good job of giving kind of a cartoon look of how you two look. And so it is fun to see that Coach Tony and Lauren are actually part of these as well. So I love how you insert yourself into the books, right?
Yeah, we think it's very important to have coaches there that are supportive and they're walking alongside the players. And as they deal with these challenges, they're there to help them and to help them work through it. So we are the coaches, and we serve to just encourage them in the game that they're playing. And oftentimes, kids need that support and they need that encouragement.
Yeah.
And we actually started this when I coached the Bucks. Lauren and a lot of the other wives used to read books in elementary schools. And Lauren came back and said, we just don't have a lot of books to read that have a good message. Number one, we have fun books, but not anything that we can talk to the kids about life. And there aren't a lot of children's books with diversity. And you kind of held up the picture. That was one thing we wanted to do. And that's why we went with the kind of the team concept, because now you could have kids from all walks of life, kids who look differently, being on the same team, and we thought that was important.
So again, Austin Plays Fair is the first one. We're going to get into Maria Finds Courage in just a minute. These are published by Harvest House. Let me just mention that we have a link to teamdungy.org, and we're going to talk about something that you can do in just a minute in that regard, but you should be able to find them in your local bookstore, but if not, we have some information about that as well. And I think you will see that they're just very graphically pleasing. And as I have a granddaughter who is real, body smart, I think she's going to be probably an athlete like her mother was, who played every one of the sports. Yeah. I can see that I'm coming home with one of these for our granddaughter for sure, because she will relate possibly to Austin. But in a minute, we're going to talk about Maria. She can really relate to that one as well. So again, we're going to take a break. We are privileged to have in studio with us Tony and Lauren Dungy. Jeremy Dice with us. We're going to get into some other aspects of that in just a minute. But we've only talked about one of the books. We have another one to talk about right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, the tech giants Facebook, Apple, and YouTube announced that they would ban the content of Alex Jones. At the same time, Twitter's Jack Dorsey explained that Alex Jones had not violated Twitter's rule, and the tech platform would act impartially regardless of political viewpoints. When I heard that he made that statement, I said on radio that he was about to face a huge backlash. I was right. Although he faced criticism from the outside, the most potent came from his fellow employees. A Twitter vice president sent out an email promising to take appropriate steps to help customers feel safe concerning potential hate speech, and Alex Jones was eventually banned. David French, in a recent commentary, reminds us that the internal mob in these tech companies is what makes a difference. There may be online outrage and a huge backlash from progressives, but the swift judgment is most effective when there are internal forces in the tech companies. He reminds us of the decision by Google to fire James Damore. Executives did so in part because employees reacted to his memo and demanded an inclusive environment. Kevin Williamson didn't last long at The Atlantic because of fears that he would negatively affect workplace relationships. All of this is important to remember when the tech giants promise to be more open-minded and to defend free speech. They have essentially formed a digital cartel that is rigorously ruled by a progressive corporate culture. Students who graduate from universities that ban conservative speakers and promote identity politics populate these tech companies. They punish their own if they stray from the progressive catechism, so it's highly unlikely that they will ever promote true free speech on their platform. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy, as well as Jeremy Dice. And if you'd like to join us a little bit later, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have some comments or questions. And, of course, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some of your other books. A book that I know has made a profound impact on the lives of a number of married couples was your book, Uncommon Marriage. So I do want to talk about that for a little bit, if you'll let me. But let's get back to the other books in Team Dungy. It's teamdungy.com. And this one, in case people are watching online or on Facebook Live, Maria Finds Courage. Now, here is, I think, a perfect illustration from our granddaughter who fears neither God nor man until she gets into a new situation. And so in this particular case, Maria's a good swimmer, but she finds herself in a new community and the swim team is not available. So now she has to learn soccer. And so help us out, Lauren, because this one teaches some wonderful characteristics as well, doesn't it?
So, yes, Maria is new to the community, and her parents want her to participate with the soccer team. Maria is not comfortable with soccer. She knows swimming. She doesn't know the soccer rules, and she doesn't know how to play, and she's afraid that she's going to kick the ball in the wrong direction. She has a number of fears. So it's just easy to stay on the sidelines and not get involved in the game. But her parents want her to try. And she has coaches that are on the sidelines that really want her to just jump in and take a stab at playing this game. She's hesitant. She has a lot of fears, but her coaches are persistent in encouraging her. And they remind her that just like swimming, she had to learn how to overcome that fear, and she had to just jump in and try it. So Maria does participate in soccer. She's successful. She makes new friends. She learns a new sport. And it's wonderful to see her emerge with confidence. And that's something that many children experience. There's something new, and they would rather stay with what they're comfortable with. But they have to branch out. They have to be a bit of a risk taker. So with a little bit of encouragement and support, they can do it, and they can be successful at it.
And one of the things I'd like to show again is there's that coach. Looks like somebody I know. And that coach actually says, when you started swimming, did you know how to swim? No. Did you have to learn? Well, maybe you should know how to learn there as well. And coach, sometimes we just need to push people over that hurdle. And that's true whether you're talking about a little young girl or whether you're talking about an NFL player that sometimes just says, I've reached my limit. And you said, no, your limit is further down the road than you think it is.
Yes. No, encouraging people to get out of their comfort zone. And more often than not, we can do more than we think we can. We just need someone who believes in us to help us along.
So, again, a couple of books, Austin Plays Fair, Maria Finds Courage. But I thought I'd talk just a minute about this special promotion. And Lauren, help us out here, because as I understand here, our listeners today can go to teendungy.com. You don't even need to know how to spell it, because we have a link there as well. It's already up on the website, so just click on your picture and they can find it. But there's a chance to win an opportunity for a child, a grandchild, a friend's child to be what? A character in the book?
That's right. We are so excited to offer this promotion. Go to teendungy.com and you can register your child or grandchild or friend, as you said, and they will have that opportunity to be the next character in an upcoming book if their name is selected. And who wouldn't want their child to be featured in a story? So, but you have to go to teendungy.com in order to be considered for that.
And we'll make sure they're a positive character, so they won't be like
right.
Bryce
They won't
doing
be Bryce.
the wrong thing.
You don't want to be Bryce, you want to be Austin or Maria. So if nothing else, those are a couple of books, and you can find out more at teendungy.com. Let me just mention for you Dallas listeners, too, if you would like to meet you face-to-face, I know that on Friday, August 24th, from 7 to 9, you're going to be at Barnes & Noble, which is at Northwest Highway in Dallas. And again, they can contact us if they need some of the details. Saturday from 1 to 3, which would be August 25th, Mardell stores. And so there's just a couple of opportunities there for people to find out a little bit more. Mardell store is in Cooper Street in Arlington. I've been to both of those. So again, some great resources. And again, Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy in studio. But Jeremy, I wanted to bring you in for a few minutes, because if we talk about coaches, I think almost every time you've been in here, because somewhere along the line we get talking about the story of Coach Joe Kennedy. Tell the story again, because I want to talk about and feature coaches for a minute for prayer.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to meet with Coach Dungy, and he knows the loneliness that is at the top of the pyramid of the football teams out there. But Coach Joe Kennedy is the coach from Bremerton, Washington, who took a knee in silent prayer after the football game as a high school football coach. I promised to do that after 20 years of serving in the United States Marine Corps. And for just simply taking a knee in silent prayer on the 50-yard line, he was let go from his team.
Fired.
Yeah, he was fired. And Coach Dungy knows about it, because I know about a year ago you were congratulating him or standing up for him. I was with Joe about 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, out in Seattle. And he told me, if you ever run into Coach Dungy, make sure you tell him thanks. I mean, you know how lonely that can be. And for a guy like Coach Kennedy, who lost his job, and is now still hopes to get back into football, because not of the X's and O's so much, but because of the kids that are there and trying to help them all out, it's painful. So he greatly appreciates your support.
Well, I know a lot of the NFL coaches. We saw the story, and just not that we couldn't believe it. We certainly understood it, but this was a coach who was doing the right things, teaching his players the right way, was not violating any issues, didn't have his team do anything. He just did what was right in his heart, and to lose your job because of that, we all thought that was terrible. I put on my Twitter feed, I admire him. This man is a hero of mine, because he's trying to do the right thing for his players.
Well, and again, one of the things that you can speak to is being a Christian in the public spotlight as an NFL coach, now as a commentator and others. You become kind of an easy target, don't you, sometimes?
We were broadcasting the Super Bowl last year for NBC.
There you go.
It was my responsibility to cover the Philadelphia Eagles leading up to the game. They had a lot of Christians on their team, but Nick Foles in particular, the backup quarterback who got thrust into the lineup, he was the focal point. And I interviewed him, and he told me he thought he was going to play very, very well because just the circumstances were so amazing. He knew it wasn't his hard work, but God had put him in that situation, and he was very confident and comfortable. So I on our broadcast that night, I said, I think Nick Foles is going to play great because of his faith in the Lord, and he feels like God's got him there for a special purpose. You'd have thought, I don't know, the worst thing in the world. How could you bring religion into the broadcast? You shouldn't do that. And I said, I'm reporter, and I'm telling you what the man told me. That's my job. But people didn't really, not that they didn't understand that, they just didn't want it brought into the broadcast.
Well, and again, I just think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on that today, because we certainly have encouraged people to pray for Coach Kennedy, to pray for people like yourself, and what an opportunity here with these new books to encourage the next generation. So I really do want to challenge individuals to think about praying for you. Every time I see you now, I think I'll be even more inclined to pray, because I remember that controversy. I remember some others as well. I'll let you bring them up if you want, or we'll forget them, either way. But I mean, there have been some times when I thought, this just is unfair. I mean, it is hard to be a highly visible Christian in a society where everybody has a chance on Twitter or on Facebook or even Instagram or something like that, or through various kind of comments to take a shot at you. And so, if nothing else, I want to encourage those of you that are standing for Christian values. And so it's really just been great to have you in studio.
They need to read Austin Plays Fair. I mean, to understand all that. You know, one thing, if I can, Tony, as a way of thanks, we created these shirts to stand behind Coach Kennedy as well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We brought these with me. You can get them at firstliberty.org. But first down is Coach Kennedy's little prayer there. Team Kennedy in the back, but he wanted me to make sure I got you a
I'd
T-shirt.
love to
got one for each of you here. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll keep them here for a little bit longer. Perhaps you have some comments or questions. You perhaps have followed the career of Tony Dungy. Certainly, I would take those phone calls. Many of you perhaps have had a chance to read Uncommon Marriage. I'd like to talk about that for just a minute, if you don't mind, because you have certainly talked about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles, of which you faced many, and people, we won't get into all the details, but many of us are very aware of that. And so if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones for a little bit. 1-800-351-1212. If you find yourself saying, I'd like to know more about these books, again, we have a link to teamdungy.com. And knowing that people sometimes tune in and tune out, one of the things we've been talking about is a special promotion. That is an opportunity to win an opportunity for your child, your grandchild, maybe a friend that would be a character in the upcoming book in this series. And they'll be a positive role model, as we mentioned before. And so, again, that's all at teamdungy.com, and you have all sorts of great material there as well. And so there's a place where you can do that. There's also Welcome to Trentwood, the home of the Tigers and Team Dungy. Meet the coaches, meet the books, enter to win. Lots of great material. It's all available at our website. But if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. Tony Dungy, Lauren Dungy, Jeremy Dice in studio with us. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy. Been talking about the children's books, Austin Plays Fair, Maria Finds Courage. They're published by Harvest House. Should be able to find them in your local bookstore, but we have a link to teamdungy.com, so you can find them there. And I might also mention, for those of you that are involved in any kind of men's ministry, the books Uncommon Life, as well as Quiet Strength, The Mentor Leader, just a couple of books off the top of my head that I just took some pictures of, by Tony Dungy. But I'd also like to, Lauren, maybe talk a little bit about uncommon marriage. When I told my wife that we were going to have you on, she said, that marriage book. And I said, well, yeah, there's children's books, but I'd got to, just for those listeners out there that have benefited from your marriage book, can we just share a little bit about why you wrote that book and why that's so helpful for so many people that are actually trying to really make their life through their marriage circumstances, right?
Absolutely. We have been asked a number of times, what is the secret to a successful marriage? What does it take to stay married and really enjoy each other and like each other after so many years? And our answer has never changed. The secret to a successful marriage is having Christ in the center of your marriage. And Tony and I love the Lord, serve him faithfully. He is the anchor in our life, and that is why we have been married for 36 years, and we've endured joys, blessings, challenges, but we are happily married, and it's because we have Jesus Christ in the center of our lives.
Yes. Tony, let me talk about some of the pressures. First, as an NFL coach, now as a commentator. All of us face some kind of pressures, but you, first of all, the pressure to win. Just the incredible grind of being an NFL coach. I have no appreciation for it other than the videos I've seen over the years where they show us what it's like for you to just be just all consumed about that. And then to have a marriage work in the midst of it, that seems almost like a grade B miracle or something. Explain what you had to deal with as a coach and why you really had to make Christ a priority in the midst of all the challenges you faced.
Well, the number one thing is coaching a professional football team. You have 53 like sons, and you know, so you have all these players that you're concerned about, your staff as well as your family. So you get this added 100-person family that's bringing all of their life experiences and problems and things that you need to solve. Then you have I don't want to call it pressure, but just everybody being concerned about the team. I mean, when we're in Tampa Bay, everybody in the area, that was their team, and they all had suggestions. They all had reasons why we should do things a little differently.
Sure.
And so not everybody has a job where 50,000 people a day are going to have a comment on what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And that can be an issue if you let it be. So you have time management. You have all these concerns, eyes on your job, and then you still have your family to try to be a husband and father to. It could be difficult at times.
Well, Lauren, one of the things that you had to think about is you're trying to orchestrate a 3-ring circus. And again, with all those children, can you give us some principles there? Because a lot of people were saying, I'm having trouble making it work with one child and a husband who comes home every night and doesn't have to work 24/7 on his job. But what can they maybe learn from some of the things you've learned over the years?
Well, we function and operate as a team. We are Team Dungy in our household, and we support and encourage one another. We have 7 children living at home. We've had a number of foster children go through our door. Right now we have 1 little boy, and we cannot operate if we're not working together. So we do support one another, and it's important that Tony and I recognize the fact that our children are all different. They may look alike, they may have some of the same hobbies and interests, but they have different personalities, and we have to respect that and encourage them and allow them to express themselves and not expect them to operate like cookie cutter children. So with that in mind, and then praying for them that they can, just grow to be productive little people that grow into warriors and daughters of the kingdom. That's so important. And we really, really impress that into our children.
And Tony, I thought you'd talk about making time for your kids, because that was really difficult when you're rising through the ranks there in the coaching staff and eventually then the head coach.
And depending on where you were, I was in Pittsburgh working for Chuck Knoll, and he was tremendous. We had great hours and got to enjoy a lot of family time. Then I worked in Kansas City, where it was different. We were working till 2 a.m, some of those that you hear about.
Just amazing.
So it showed me both sides of it, showed me that you can win both ways. When I became the head coach, I adopted Coach Knoll's strategy. Hey, we're going to be efficient, do as much as we can, and we're going to make it a family atmosphere. He used to have what we call Family Saturday, where every Saturday practice you brought the kids, let them see where Dad was and be part of it. And so I was going to incorporate that and make it a family-friendly place. And that was kind of my motivation, especially the last 8 or 10 years I was coaching. I wanted to show people you could still win, you could be at the top level, but do it in that way and family-friendly. My boys were at the office a lot. They were at practice a lot. I'd take them on the road trips. I did as much as I could to incorporate them into things.
You know, we did an interview last hour, and one of the things we talked about is YAC, which is yards after contact, and we were using that illustration to talk about perseverance. And it seems to me that sometimes just to put one foot in front of the other when sometimes it's really difficult. You're both shaking your head. So, Tony, let me come to you first, because that's that issue of perseverance and saying every day there are people that go to divorce courts to get divorced over what other couples have decided to work through, right?
Yeah, you're always going to have issues in marriage and life and raising your kids. You're going to have issues on the job. And, you don't win every game. That's one thing I think sports teaches you. But just because you lose a game doesn't mean, the season's over, we quit, we throw in the towel. No, you go back to work and say, what did we do wrong? How can we get better and win the next game? And I think you have to do the same thing in marriage and parenting.
And again, sometimes, Lauren, it's just difficult. It's the battle of the diapers and the laundry and all the things that are part of a woman's life to try to make some sense out of it, right?
It can be overwhelming if you allow it to be. And we like to think that, as Tony said, we're committed to making it work, to making it happen. But also, we have a schedule that really helps us operate smoothly. And in our household, we have a huge calendar.
Wow.
Every child is assigned a color.
Yes.
And if you're purple, then you're Jordan, and he can look at the calendar and say, oh, this is what I have to do today, or I have a dentist appointment, because mom can't do everything. So they all share in the responsibility of operating in the family, in the Dungy family, by looking at their calendar. Now, if the calendar falls down or if somebody takes it in the room, then we have a problem. But it works well, and we're pretty organized.
Sometimes looking at that calendar, though, you see 6 different colors in 2 hours on the same day. Okay, how are we going to handle this?
But, man, it sounds like you got to have 2 days to prepare to be part of this family.
You do need to prepare for that. Let me come to Jeremy, because that's one of the things I wanted to encourage people to do is to pray for Coach Dungy, to pray for Joe Kennedy, and really just to pray for their coach. And you're even encouraging right now, aren't you, that coaches might go to the 50-yard line after the game and do the same thing that Coach Kennedy did, right?
Look, we believe it's perfectly constitutional. And, you understand that you're taking the same risk that Coach Kennedy took in defending his own freedoms to go to the 50-yard line. And this is important. You go to the 50-yard line after the game's done. You take a knee in silent prayer. Now, in Coach Kennedy's case, it was the school district saying, we know what you're really doing down there. And that's why they terminated him.
Yeah.
I mean, it just crushed that community who loved Coach Kennedy, and he loved them all back. And so he's now on the sidelines trying to fight for his right to continue to have his job, and for coaches everywhere to be able to have their job. We're working at the Supreme Court of the United States right now on his case. Who knew that Coach Kennedy would have to, a football coach would have to go all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States? They don't have to take his case. We hope that they will. And we would love to have more people come alongside of Coach Kennedy like Coach Dungy has already. Call him a hero and say, hey, go out there and do what you're called to do.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. Back when I was in the 90s, I was an assistant coach with the Steelers. We look at it now. We see the players after the games kneeling in prayer, both teams at the 50-yard line, and it's pretty commonplace. But when that first started, Reggie White kind of started that in the early 90s.
I remember that.
And we got a memo from the NFL office saying, do not allow your players to go to midfield. They must go straight to the locker room after the game, because they were afraid that people would see these two teams together and it would take away the spirit of the competition. And Reggie White and those guys said, we're not doing that. we are not going straight to the locker room. We're going to continue to do what we do. And now it's commonplace and everybody does it. But there was a time when they were trying to not let that happen. And it took perseverance and people saying, no, we're going to stand up for the Lord.
Outstanding. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll finish off with Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy. Of course, Jeremy Dice with us. And right now, as a matter of fact, you can hear his commentary from First Liberty. When we come back, we'll also talk about the fact that, a lot of coaches and teams are doing things that the people with the separation of church and state don't like. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. At the heart of religious liberty is the right to follow the faith of our choice. That means that no one, not even the United States Air Force, may force someone to follow any particular faith. But when Jeff Montanari converted to Orthodox Judaism, the Air Force treated him poorly. They rejected his application to be a Jewish chaplain, something the Air Force has a great need for at the present time. His superior officers were hostile towards him, excluding him from activities in order to drive him from the Air Force. He even received a litany of questions that questioned the sincerity of his conversion to Judaism. First Liberty sent a demand letter to the Air Force explaining that their job is to win wars, not question the legitimacy of someone's conversion. We believe the actions of a few Air Force officials to be unlawful discrimination. As the U.S. Supreme Court put it in Hobby v. Unemployment Appeals Commission of Florida, the First Amendment protects the free exercise rights of employees who convert from one faith to another after they are hired. In other words, religious liberty protects against discrimination even when you change your religion. Chaplain Montanari just wants to continue serving his country in accordance with his religious beliefs. We are confident that the Air Force can easily solve this problem and stand ready to assist in that process. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we have Tony Dungy and Lauren Dungy in here. And I recognize that people sometimes tune in and tune out, so I thought for just a minute I might talk about again, in case you hadn't heard, that we have been talking about these books, Austin Plays Fair, and that's one of those. And then the other one, Maria Finds Courage. And Lauren, if you don't mind, let's just, again, for some people that maybe didn't have a chance to hear you talk about these earlier, these are both children's books, but these really teach teamwork, courage, sportsmanship, and again, are available. They're published by Harvest House. You can find them in your local bookstore. Well, of course, we also have a link to teamdungy.com, don't we?
Yes, we do. We're very excited about the books, and we hope that you'll go out and buy them and just benefit from the lessons that are taught in both stories. And we also want to mention, too, that we have that opportunity, if you go to teamdungy.com, to be a character in the next upcoming book by registering your child. So if his or her name is pulled, then he or she can be a character in one of our stories.
Now, these, again, are Team Dungy, but some of the earlier books, you had stuff on bullying. That one really stood out for me because I am, matter of fact, a few hours from now, going to be chairing a board meeting for an organization that has for years been talking about abstinence and drugs, but now the biggest issue is bullying. It is the big issue. It is the big issue right now.
Bullying is a big problem, and when Tony and I would visit the local elementary schools and ask them, well, what would you like to talk about, or what would you like to see us write about next? Inevitably, they would say bullying, that needs to be addressed. So sadly, it's still going on. And so we did write a story about bullying, and we hope to encourage boys and girls with that. It's something that needs to be talked about.
Well, and again, one of the things about bullying is it's changed. Even if I had a bully in high school or college or in junior high or something like that, I could at least escape from them. But now with the social media, I mean, you can be bullied 24/7, can't you? So
and
that's a whole new.
And that's
we do see that happening.
Yeah. And back to your uncommon marriage, one other principle, with all those kids, you got to really limit the amount of time that they spend in front of a screen, right? Isn't that the big challenge?
Very important. Yeah. And we try to encourage them with so many other activities and any chance that we can get. We do live in Florida, but we get them outside and into the sunshine. And, as a family, we have a good time. And TV is maybe when it's raining or late at night. We really encourage them to do other things.
And Jeremy, I think you have 4 boys, if I remember right.
I do.
And just cannot let them spend time in front of a screen. You need to get them out in organized sports and just going out there and being a kid, right?
It's funny. Our TV in our media room, my third-born son just pulled the plug on it the other day and burned it out. So just yesterday, as a matter of fact, it was kind of funny that they got done with all their schoolwork, and they're like, I just kind of want to read a book. I'm like, yes, this is a great thing.
Unusual, yes.
Yeah, but that's exactly what we need to talk about. So again, one of the advantages of these is you're really talking about sports. And it does seem to me that we see interest in sports declining. Now, part of that, Tony, as you well know, is some parents are afraid of concussions. Mm-hmm. And frankly, just as many kids get concussions, if not more, in soccer than in football. So it's not like football is the only place, but for parents already worried about their kids, and then kids too much tied to their digital devices, it seems to me that these books might encourage them to show some courage, get out of their comfort zone, and go out there and be involved in a team sport.
No, it is. And I think back to the lessons that I learned, the friends that I made. We talked about perseverance earlier and sticking with it. You learn those lessons in sports, and we want kids to participate and be involved. We fight it with our kids. Hey, why don't you go out and play? Okay, I'll text Joey and see if he can play. Why don't you walk over to his house? But no, we're in that day and age where texting and communicating electronically is what our kids are gravitating to.
Well, that's why I wanted to kind of end by just saying, Jeremy, maybe we should talk about how we should be praying for coaches. All of us around this table can recognize that coaches had a profound impact in our lives. And certainly you're challenging some coaches to go out there and set an example and go to the 50-yard line and pray. But if they do, there might be somebody, Freedom from Religion Foundation, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, or ACLU, or somebody that might want to bring a lawsuit. So what do they do if that happens?
First Liberty Institute wins against all those groups all the time. So we're happy to defend you if that comes to your territory as well. But it strikes me that these books, all the books you've written, all coalesce together in one central message. Not only is it teaching fairness and courage and all the things that you're teaching the kids in your kids' books, but you've got coaches out there that are having to care for kids as if they're their own kids nowadays. The parenting books you've written, the marriage books you've written to encourage parents, moms and dads to love one another so that they're teaching concepts of courage, that they're teaching concepts of fairness and all that is enormously important today. And I think the country owes you guys a debt of gratitude for dedicating your lives by setting not only writing these books, but setting the example of what it looks like to be good husbands and wives to each other, and then mom and dad to your kids. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know I used to take Lauren on our road trips, and I wanted her to be with me, and she liked the games and everything, but it was really so many of our kids needed to see that my players who were in their 20s and 30s needed to see a couple together, husband and wife united, And we needed to teach them about more than just playing their sport. So that's what I encourage coaches now. Hey, you've got a great opportunity, yes, to teach about the sport, but to help these young men and women that are under your guidance, to teach them about life.
And again, some of those Christian principles, I know that you would certainly be a fan of Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and that is another organization I could mention that we need to support, because these are just opportunities to teach Christian principles. And really, if you think about it, some of the principles, the life principles we apply as Christians, really come from team sports, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely do.
Let me give you some action items real quickly. First of all, of course, we have a link to teamdungy.com. One of the things I encourage some people to do is to actually watch the video. It's a 4.5-minute video. And then on the upper right-hand corner, there's an arrow. It's a share button. Click on that share button and watch the video. It's only 4.5 minutes long. Then maybe put it on your Facebook page, put it on your Twitter feed, maybe send it by an email. Maybe you know a coach or a Christian that would benefit from some of these. Maybe you know a family that don't even know that these books existed. Send that to them today. So can I give all of you a responsibility? It's only going to take you about 4.5 minutes, and it's the whole Team Dungy series by Tony and Lauren, so you get a chance to see them if you haven't already seen them on our Facebook page or on our live feed, and then take the time to promote those again. But again, we can find these books in the bookstore, can't we?
Yes, they are available in the bookstore or online.
And again, Harvest House, I think they've just done an outstanding job. And so these are the first two, but the next one, is that a possibility that somebody could have their child or their grandchild in that book? So.
We've got a space for that person, and we'd love to have them featured, a positive character.
That would be good. Jeremy, thank you for joining us again. And for those of you that might be wondering about the legality of all that, maybe there's a Fellowship of Christian Athlete that's having some problems, or there's a coach that's having some problems, or they're saying, well, we really can't have a prayer in the huddle or something like that. They can contact you, can't they?
Please go to firstliberty.org and let us know how we can help out. And while you're there, pick up the shirt that Tony Dungy and his wife are now going to be wearing all over the country in support of Coach Kennedy.
Absolutely.
So again, it has just been great to have you both in here, and I will certainly be praying for you even more so now. We've just appreciated your Christian testimony. I've appreciated some of your books on Uncommon, which we didn't talk about today. And by the way, if you're doing a men's ministry, these are books that are absolutely essential. If you're doing a marriage conference, Uncommon Marriage, and of course, these are children's books, which I think are just part of the whole Team Dungy library, if you will, that's available. So thank you both for being here today on Point of View.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're going to take a break, and tomorrow is our weekend edition, and we'll have Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter. I think Lathan Watts will be with us. We're going to talk about all the issues in the news. We have a lot to talk about this week. There have been some court cases, and Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, of course, President Donald Trump. Well, we've got a lot to talk about, not to mention some of these religious liberty cases we've been following. So I hope you'll take the time to visit us tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.